Clara Bennett, a 24-year-old secretary, carried the weight of her family's burdens like chains pulling at her every step. In Savannah, Georgia, the office walls where she worked felt suffocating, each file cabinet and coffee-stained desk a reminder of the small, ordinary life she was trapped in. Her father, once a proud builder whose hands had shaped half the neighborhoods in the city, was now reduced to a broken man, watching muted television reports as if they could bring back what the recession had stolen. Her mother worked tirelessly, as a nurse caring for Clara's ailing grandfather, her smile long gone, her body drained by endless shifts. Every paycheck Clara earned felt like a drop of rain in a bottomless well of debt. Then, one Tuesday, the phone rang, a call that would change everything. The voice on the line belonged to a refined intermediary who spoke of a man named Alexander Morgan, a name whispered with awe and fear in Boston's financial world. The proposal was as simple as it was brutal: a marriage, not of love, but of convenience. In return, every crushing debt her family faced would vanish. When Clara met Alexander in a quiet hotel suite, she saw at once that he was not an ordinary man. At 42, his features were chiseled and sharp, his storm gray eyes both magnetic and intimidating. He wasted no words. "This is a business transaction, Miss Bennett," he told her, his voice low and steady. "Nothing more. You will be a partner. In public, a respectable wife at social gatherings, and in exchange your family will be free." Her heart screamed in protest. She wasn't a product to be bought and sold. But when she thought of her father's hollow eyes, her mother's tired hands, and the monster of unpaid medical bills, her resolve broke. With a trembling hand, she signed the agreement. The pen felt like a brand, marking her as his possession. Over. The following 3 months, Clara was reshaped into a figure fit for Alexander's world. She was fitted for gowns worth more than her family's annual income, trained to glide through conversations with Boston's elite, and taught the careful art of playing a role she had never wanted. To society, she became a perfect porcelain doll. Alexander, meanwhile, kept his distance, always present yet emotionally untouchable. His respect was cool and formal, never warm. She soon learned why. The shadow of his ex-wife, Isabella, haunted him. A woman who had deceived, humiliated, and betrayed him so deeply that he had built walls of steel around his heart. The wedding itself was a blur of white roses, silk, and flashing cameras. In Savannah's grandest church, Clara felt like an imposter, a small-town girl trapped inside a role far too large for her. The reception was no better. A glittering spectacle where her only anchor was Alexander's steady but impersonal presence at her side. Yet when they shared their first dance beneath the music and the curious gazes, she felt a spark, subtle but undeniable, a dangerous current beneath his practiced coldness. When they arrived at his Cape Cod mansion, a palace of glass and sea, air, Clara stood before the antique mirror in her bridal suite. Dressed in delicate lace, she whispered to her reflection, "I have never belonged to anyone." The girl in the mirror looked just as frightened as she felt. Then Alexander entered. The air grew heavy with silence. He shed his jacket and loosened his tie, avoiding her gaze as though afraid of what he might see. Staring out at the restless ocean, he reminded her once more that theirs was a business arrangement. His words cut deep, reinforcing every wall he had built. She was little more than an asset, a symbol of respectability, and yet, when he finally stepped closer, when his hand hesitated in the space between them, something broke through the armor he wore. His lips met hers in a kiss that wasn't calculated or cold, but desperate, raw, and hungry. It was the collision of two lonely souls, each aching for something more than survival. He pulled away, breath ragged, whispering, "I don't know what that was." But it wasn't supposed to happen. His voice ordered his heart to retreat, but Clara already knew. No wall was strong enough to hide the truth forever. The days that followed were a delicate dance of distance and silence. Alexander threw himself into his work, his phone always in hand, his laptop glowing late into the night as if the world of steel and numbers could shield him from anything real. The mansion in Cape Cod became his fortress, and Clara, though surrounded by opulence, felt like a guest in someone else's carefully curated museum. She wandered the echoing halls lined with marble and glass, her footsteps swallowed by the silence. But outside on the private beach, she found her only sanctuary. The sand, fine and pale, reminded her of childhood summers with her grandmother, who had taught her how to read the tides, how to see beauty in the smallest things. On the shoreline, Clara traced patterns in the sand with a stick, grounding herself in memories of simpler times. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Alexander found her there. His voice carried over the wind, low and weary from yet another call. He sat beside her on a piece of driftwood, the silence between them not tense, but fragile, like a truce. Clara pointed to the small sandcastle she had been building. "My grandmother taught me," she said softly. "Every castle needs a strong foundation, just like a life." Something flickered across his face. "My father used to say the same," Alexander admitted, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "But he believed in foundations of concrete and steel. He said you couldn't trust anything that couldn't survive a storm." His words hung in the air like a confession, a rare glimpse into the man behind the polished armor. For a moment, Clara saw him differently, not just as the untouchable magnate, but as the boy he once had been, who learned to build walls so high they kept everyone out. Then just as quickly, his mask returned. He stood abruptly, muttering, "I need to get back to work." That night, Clara sat alone in the library as a storm gathered outside. The wind howled, rattling the windows, and the sky turned a bruised purple. When Alexander entered, his face was drawn tight with stress. She whispered, "It's beautiful, isn't it? The way the storm changes the light." He didn't answer at first. His hand rested on a globe, tracing the continents as if searching for a place untouched by chaos. "I used to love storms," he said finally, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear. "They reminded me that some things are bigger than us, but now, they only remind me of everything I can't control." Clara's heart ached for him. She saw not the cold businessman, but a man imprisoned by his past, a man trying desperately to keep his world from crumbling again. Summoning her courage, she said, "Alexander, I know you think this is just a contract. Maybe it started that way, but I don't want it to stay that way. I want to know you, the real you." He turned to her sharply, his storm gray eyes hard. "There is no real me left to know, Clara. Not anymore." His words hit her like a blow, and before she could respond, he walked out, leaving her with the rising storm. Yet even as the thunder crashed, she felt a strange resolve take root. He could build his walls as high as he wanted. She would find a way to climb them. The following days slid into routine, a rhythm of his work and her solitude. Still, Clara began to notice the cracks in his armor. She saw the way his jaw tightened when an investor challenged him, the way he ran his hand through his hair in moments of stress, the way he lingered by the window at night as if staring into a past he couldn't escape. Then one morning in the sunroom he caught her sketching. The old oak tree at the edge of the property took shape in her notebook, its twisted branches shaded with care. He paused, watching her, unprepared for the intimacy of her quiet creation. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. "Just sketching," she said shyly. "My grandmother taught me. She said it helps you see the beauty in things others overlook." He leaned closer, studying the lines with unexpected fascination. "It's good," he murmured, almost surprised at himself. "You have a gift, Clara. It's not just a hobby. It's a part of who you are." For the first time, he opened a door into his own world. He told her about a new project in the Colorado mountains, a hotel he dreamed of building, designed not just for luxury but harmony with the land. His eyes lit with passion, his voice alive in a way she had never heard before. He spoke not as a cold magnate, but as a dreamer, a creator. Clara listened, her heart swelling at the revelation. When he left abruptly for another call, he left. behind a folded drawing on the table. Clara opened it and gasped. The design was breathtaking, wood, stone, and glass blending seamlessly into a mountain landscape, a vision of beauty and strength. For the first time, she saw the man he truly was beneath the scars, a man not defined by betrayal, but by creation. And in that moment, she knew. He wasn't unreachable. He was just afraid. The days that followed became a fragile dance, a rhythm of unspoken words and fleeting glances. Clara watched Alexander from the quiet corners of the mansion, noticing the smallest details. How his shoulders tightened during phone calls, how his hand raked through his dark hair when pressure mounted, how silence seemed to be his chosen armor. But then there were moments when that armor cracked, and those moments were enough to keep her believing. One evening, as the sky blushed pink over Cape Cod, she found herself on the veranda sketching in her notebook. The waves rolled in a steady rhythm, the breeze carrying salt and memory. She was lost in shading the twisted branches of an oak tree when Alexander walked in. For a moment, he simply stood there, phone in hand, surprised by the intimacy of what he saw. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. Clara startled, then smiled shyly. "Just sketching. My grandmother taught me. She said it was a way to notice the beauty that others might miss." He stepped closer, his presence commanding, yet strangely vulnerable. His eyes lingered on the page. "It's good," he said with honest surprise. "You've got an eye for detail. That's not just a pastime, Clara. That's a part of you." Her heart skipped. It was the first time he had acknowledged her for more than the role she played. Then, as if pulled by a tide stronger than himself, Alexander began to speak of his work. He told her about a new hotel project in the Colorado mountains, his voice alive with passion. He described structures of stone and glass rising from the earth, buildings designed not to dominate nature but to belong to it. His hands moved as he spoke, sketching invisible lines in the air, his gray eyes alight with vision. Clara listened, captivated. She saw a man transformed, no longer the cold magnate, but a dreamer, a creator, someone who cared deeply about beauty and legacy. For the first time, she saw the fire that burned behind the walls he had built. When he left abruptly for another call, she noticed he had left a folded drawing on the table. Curious, she opened it. What she found took her breath away. It was a sketch of the Colorado resort, a masterpiece of design where wood and stone melted seamlessly into the mountainside. It was more than architecture. It was a reflection of his soul, honest and unguarded. Clara traced the lines with trembling fingers, realizing she had glimpsed the truest part of him. And she knew then. Beneath all his scars, Alexander Morgan was not unreachable. He was simply afraid to be seen. The days that followed deepened her resolve. She began to study him more closely, searching for the man behind the fortress. She noticed the way his jaw softened when he looked out at the sea, the flicker of pain when he thought no one was watching, the way his silence spoke louder than any words. Then one night, as the moon painted the ocean silver, they stood together on the veranda. Alexander held a glass of amber liquid, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He didn't turn when he spoke. "You're watching me," he said, his voice low. It wasn't an accusation, just a truth. Clara didn't look away. I'm trying to understand you." He let out a humorless laugh. "Don't bother. There's nothing left to understand." "I don't believe that," she said firmly. "I see the man who designed that resort, the man who still cares enough to create beauty when he doesn't have to. You think you're an unfeeling fortress, but I know you're more than that." At last, he turned to face her, his eyes, stormy, and filled with shadows, locked onto hers. "You don't know what it's like," he said bitterly, "to build a life on trust, only to have it shattered by the one person you believed in. To realize every kiss, every whispered promise was nothing but a calculated lie." His voice cracked, and for the first time he spoke of Isabella, the ex-wife who had betrayed him in the most public, humiliating way. He told Clara how Isabella had leaked his business secrets, costing him millions, how she had used their bed as a weapon, every moment of intimacy, nothing but a mask for manipulation. His words dripped with pain, his anger raw and unfiltered. Clara's heart ached. She finally understood. His coldness wasn't indifference. It was a scar, carved deep by betrayal. Gently, she reached out and touched his arm. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, "but I am not her, and I would never betray you like that." For a moment, something shifted in his eyes. She saw not the fortress, but the wounded man within, searching for something he was terrified to believe in. And though he didn't speak, the silence between them felt like a fragile promise, one that could change everything. The days that followed unfolded like a delicate dance, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Alexander still buried himself in work, but something in him had shifted. He began to carve out time for Clara, moments that felt unplanned yet profoundly intentional. One afternoon, he led her down a hidden path that curved along the cliffs of Cape Cod, opening onto a secluded cove where the water sparkled turquoise against rocks smoothed by centuries of waves. They sat together in silence, the sea crashing at their feet. No words were needed. The stillness between them carried a new intimacy. Clara felt it in the way his presence steadied her, in the way his silence no longer shut her out but wrapped around them like a fragile bond. Slowly, Alexander began to share fragments of himself. He told her about summers spent on his grandfather's farm, about the lessons he had learned in discipline and resilience. He even confessed, with the faintest smile, stories of business rivals he had outmaneuvered with ruthless precision. Clara, in turn, spoke of her parents, of her mother's strength and her father's quiet dignity, of the small joys she had held on to even in the darkest days of debt. For the first time, Alexander listened, not with polite detachment, but with genuine attention. His storm-gray eyes softened when she spoke, as though he was relearning how to see the world through her stories. One evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they walked along the beach. The salt air clung to Clara's hair, and Alexander's hand brushed against hers before closing around it. His grip, once formal and stiff, was warm and steady now. He stopped, turning toward her, his expression serious. "Clara," he said, quietly, his voice roughened by emotions he rarely allowed himself to feel. "You have a way of seeing things, of seeing me. I've been blind for so long, but somehow you found a way to look past all my walls." Her heart pounded at his words. She squeezed his hand. "Walls are meant to be climbed, Alexander, or better yet, doors can be built into them." For the first time since she met him, he laughed. Not a cold chuckle, but a warm, unguarded laugh that reached his eyes. The sound startled her with its richness. In that moment, Clara saw a glimpse of the man he could be, the man hidden beneath the scars of betrayal. He pulled her into his arms then, holding her tightly. The embrace was not businesslike, not formal, but raw and human. His heart beat against hers, and for a moment the walls crumbled completely. But then, just as quickly, shadows returned to his face. Clara felt him tense, the memory of Isabella's betrayal tugging him back into his cage. "I should go," he murmured, his voice heavy with caution. He pulled away, leaving her standing on the beach with the fading light wrapping her in loneliness. The rhythm continued. Progress followed, by retreat. Yet Clara refused to give up. She began leaving him little notes, sketches of the ocean tucked into his briefcase, a flower laid gently on his desk, a single sentence scribbled on folded paper. "You're not alone." Alexander never mentioned them, but she noticed how he kept every piece. Folded drawings were tucked into his books. Pressed flowers rested inside files he never threw away. His silence wasn't rejection. It was a quiet, wordless acknowledgement. Then came the night when a storm tore across the Cape, shaking the mansion with thunder and rattling the windows with sheets of rain. Clara sat in her room, sketchbook in her lap, when Alexander appeared, at the door. His face was pale, his eyes uncharacteristically unsettled. "My room," he said, his voice strained. "The storm is leaking through the windows." It was an obvious lie, flimsy and transparent, but Clara didn't challenge it. She only nodded, gesturing to the warm space near the fireplace. He sat on the rug, the firelight flickering across his sharp features, and for the first time, she saw not the businessman, not the fortress, but a man stripped of control. A man quietly haunted by chaos. The thunder cracked and he flinched, his body taut with unspoken fear. Clara's heart softened. She moved closer and wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, her touch steady and gentle. Alexander leaned into her, his head resting against her chest. She stroked his hair, feeling his breath steady against her heartbeat. In that moment, he was no longer the powerful magnate who commanded rooms, but a man seeking shelter in her presence, a scarred soul finding comfort in her arms. The storm raged outside, but within those walls, the fortress finally crumbled. Clara held him tighter, knowing with certainty that this was the beginning of breaking through his last barrier. The storm outside grew wilder, howling against the glass, but in Clara's room the world had shifted into something fragile and intimate. Alexander's head rested against her chest, his breath uneven, his body trembling not from cold but from the emotions he could no longer bury. She stroked his hair slowly, her fingers gentle, her heart aching for the man who had carried his scars in silence for so long. For the first time, he wasn't Alexander Morgan the magnate, the fortress of steel and stone. He was simply a man, undone by chaos he could not control. Clara's presence calmed him, her warmth a balm he hadn't known he needed. He lifted his head finally, his storm-gray eyes searching hers with a desperation that cut through every wall. "Why?" His voice was a raw whisper, stripped of its usual authority. "Why are you doing this? Why are you here?" Clara held his, gaze steady and unflinching. "Because I see you," she said softly. "Not just the man who built walls, not just the businessman everyone fears. I see the man who still feels, the man who still has love inside him even if he's afraid of it. And I want you to know, it's safe to feel again." For a moment he looked at her as though he couldn't believe her words, as if he expected her to flinch, to pull away, to see him as weak. But instead she stayed, and something inside him finally broke free. He reached for her, his hands cupping her face with a tenderness that startled them both. Their lips met in a kiss that carried none of the restraint of their first. This was not hunger born of denial, but something deeper, slower, more certain. It was the kiss of two souls finding each other after years of loneliness. The storm outside thundered, rattling the walls, but inside the firelight flickered against their closeness, casting shadows that seemed to dance with them. His hands trembled as he pulled back slightly, his forehead pressed against hers. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low and reverent. "I don't want to hurt you, Clara. I don't want to make the same mistake again." She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. "I'm sure," she whispered, her lips brushing his. "This isn't a mistake. Not with you." The hesitation in his eyes faded, replaced by something fierce and raw. The last of his defenses fell away. Their bodies came together, not as part of an arrangement, not as a transaction, but as two people who had found in each other the one thing they thought they had lost forever. Trust. They made love as the storm raged outside, every touch a promise, every kiss a breaking of chains. For Clara, it was the moment when her heart finally belonged not to obligation but to choice. For Alexander, it was the moment he realized love was not weakness but strength. The strength to risk, to believe, to hope again. When the storm at Ibaisaidea last began to fade, the fire burned low and the room filled with a quiet golden glow. Clara lay in his arms, his steady breathing against her skin, her heart full in a way she had never imagined. Alexander looked at her, his eyes soft and unguarded. For the first time, "You're beautiful," he murmured, his voice husky with awe. "Do you know that?" A blush touched her cheeks and she smiled faintly. "I've been told." He kissed her forehead, lingering, reverent. You make me feel alive, Clara. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe again. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his words sink into her soul. Outside, the last drops of rain fell against the windows, the storm giving way to calm. Inside, she knew a different kind of storm had passed, the storm within his heart. And as dawn approached, spilling soft light across the Cape Cod horizon, it was no longer just the beginning of a marriage of convenience. It was the fragile, beautiful beginning of something real. The morning after the storm was unlike any other Clara had known. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Cape Cod mansion, golden and warm, banishing the last traces of thunder. She lay in Alexander's arms, her cheek against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time since they met, there was peace in his expression. The storm within him had quieted, if only for now. He stirred awake, his gray eyes soft and unguarded. A small, genuine smile curved his lips, and Clara felt her heart ache with joy. "You make me feel alive," he whispered, his voice husky with the rawness of honesty. "For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe again." Clara kissed his cheek, her own heart brimming with something too powerful to name. It was love, not forced, not bargained, but born in the fire of storms, both real and emotional. The days that followed became a discovery. They walked the manicured gardens hand in hand, sharing long breakfasts on the veranda while the sound of the ocean became their companion. Alexander was no longer the distant magnate she had once feared. He was present, attentive, asking for her thoughts on his architectural designs and listening as though her words carried weight equal to any investor's. He showed her sketches for new hotels, drawings she studied with fascination. Clara's own ideas, gentle touches of warmth and humanity, found their way into his projects. Together, they created not just buildings on paper, but visions of places filled with life. For Alexander, it was more than business. It was the rediscovery of passion, a reminder that creation was most meaningful when shared. For Clara, it was the first time she felt seen, not as an ornament, not as a wife by contract, but as a partner. The girl who had once been buried beneath her family's debts was slowly transforming into a woman whose voice mattered, whose presence was cherished. But reality, like an unwelcome guest, was never far away. Their honeymoon days slipped by too quickly, and the world beyond Cape Cod waited for them with sharp edges and unforgiving eyes. Their first public appearance as husband and wife came at a grand charity gala in Boston. The Plaza Ballroom glittered, with chandeliers filled with polished laughter and the scent of champagne. Clara wore a deep navy gown, elegant and understated, but as she stepped into the room on Alexander's arm, she felt like a lamb among wolves. Whispers followed them. Almost instantly, she heard the cutting voices of women who floated through the social scene like predators, Mariana Hayes and Patricia Crawford. A Southern secretary who caught Alexander Morgan? Obviously after his money. He doesn't realize she's just playing the perfect wife. We've seen dozens of women like her. Clara's stomach twisted. She felt their stares burning into her, stripping away the confidence she had built with Alexander in private. Her steps faltered, but his hand pressed firmly at the small of her back, steady and protective. He had heard them too. His jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with barely contained fury. Without a word, he guided her toward the center of the room, where the host handed him the microphone. His voice, deep and commanding, cut through the air. He spoke of the charity, of the work being funded. But then his words shifted. "I'd also like to thank my wife, Clara," he said, turning to her with eyes full of something that silenced the crowd. "For her strength, her compassion, and her unwavering belief in me. She is the most beautiful woman in this room, not just on the outside, but in every way that matters. I am a better man for having her by my side." The ballroom fell into hushed silence. The whispers that had threatened to shatter Clara's confidence dissolved, replaced by stunned stares. In that moment, Alexander had not only defended her, he had claimed her, proudly and publicly as his partner. Clara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. He had turned her greatest fear, the world's judgment, into a moment of honor. And for the first time, she truly felt that their love was not just surviving but defying the world outside. Yet even as his words wrapped her in warmth, Clara sensed it. The world would not relent so easily. Shadows still lingered, and ghosts from Alexander's past had not finished their haunting. The glow of Alexander's words at the gala carried Clara through the night, but the world beyond that ballroom was not so easily silenced. Whispers had been quieted, yes, but not erased, and in the shadows of Boston's elite there were still those eager to tear them down. After the gala, as Clara and Alexander prepared to leave, an old face stepped out from the crowd. Mr. Richard Miller, a Yaoai's family acquaintance from Savannah, carried the marks of a hard life in the deep lines of his weathered face. His voice was thick with a southern drawl as he shook Alexander's hand. "Never thought I'd see Clara Bennett here," he said, his tone laced with both surprise and skepticism. "How's your family, Clara? Heard things have been tough." The question was innocent enough on the surface, but Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Around them, curious eyes sharpened, waiting for her to stumble. In that moment, all the weight of their arrangement pressed down on her. The truth that she had entered this marriage not from love, but from desperation. She opened her mouth to respond, but Alexander was faster. His voice cut through the tension, calm and steady. "Her family is doing well, Mr. Miller, thanks to Clara." He said nothing more, yet the meaning was clear. It was not pity, not shame. It was respect. He had turned what could have been her humiliation into a quiet declaration of her strength. Clara's chest tightened with gratitude, but the eyes around them lingered, hungry for cracks. Later that week, the cracks came from somewhere far more dangerous. Clara answered the phone one afternoon, expecting her mother's familiar voice. Instead, a silky tone oozed through the line. "Clara," the voice purred. "How lovely to finally speak with you. My name is Clarissa. Perhaps Alexander mentioned me. I was a friend of Isabella's." The name hit like a cold blade. Isabella, the ghost that haunted Alexander, the wound that had shaped his every wall. Clarissa's words dripped with poison. "I heard about your little arrangement. It's such a shame. After everything Alexander endured with Isabella, he went and married another con artist. Do you really think he'll keep you, dear? You're just a pretty prop, a performance for his investors. When the time comes, he'll discard you just like he did with her." The line clicked dead before Clara could respond, leaving her standing in stunned silence, the venom seeping into her heart. That night, as Alexander loosened his tie after a long day, Clara finally confronted him. The words tumbled out, raw and desperate. "Is it true? Did you pay Isabella to keep quiet? Am I just another one of your investments?" The color drained from his face. For a moment he looked like the man she had glimpsed in the storm, haunted, exhausted, stripped bare. His shoulders sagged, and he turned toward the window, staring out at the glittering city lights. "Yes," he said finally, his voice heavy, with regret. "I paid her." Clara's heart cracked, but before despair could take root, his words rushed out, broken and honest. "I didn't pay her to keep secrets. I paid her to stay away, to never appear in my life again, to never sabotage my business, my name, my future. It was the last, ugliest piece of a life that had already been destroyed. And I was ashamed to admit I had let her break me that completely. I thought I could protect you from that, past by burying it." He turned then, and for the first time Clara saw everything. His shame, his scars, his truth. His gray eyes glistened with a pain he could no longer hide. Clara stepped forward, cupping his face in her hands. Her thumbs brushed the lines of exhaustion carved into his skin. "You're not a fool, Alexander. You were a man who trusted someone who didn't deserve it. You were hurt, but you are not broken. You've learned to love again, with me. And that's what matters." Something in him shattered at her words. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly, it felt as if he feared she might vanish. His voice was raw against her ear. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, Clara. You've taught me that love isn't weakness. It's strength, the greatest strength a man can have." In that embrace, Clara felt the truth. This was no longer about contracts or appearances. This was love, raw and undeniable, forged in the fire of scars and second chances. But though their bond had never been stronger, Clara knew the world outside would test it again. And somewhere in those shadows, Isabella's ghost still lingered, refusing to let go. The days that followed were a fragile but beautiful dance of healing. The truth had been spoken, the past laid bare, and though the scars of Isabella still lingered, something new had begun to bloom between Alexander and Clara. Their marriage was no longer a business transaction dressed up in lace and vows. It was becoming something deeper, something real. Alexander worked tirelessly on his projects, but now he made space for Clara. He invited her into his world in ways he never had before. She sat beside him as he reviewed architectural drawings, her sketches and suggestions adding a warmth and humanity that softened his sleek designs. What had once been blueprints of steel and glass became visions of places filled with life, infused with her touch. Clara, in turn, discovered a confidence she never knew she possessed. She was no longer the trembling girl forced into a marriage for survival. She was a woman whose voice mattered, whose presence was cherished. Each time Alexander looked at her across the table, listening intently as she spoke, she felt herself becoming not just his wife, but his partner. Their days were filled with quiet joy. They walked the gardens hand in hand, their laughter mingling with the sound of the sea. They lingered over breakfasts on the veranda, sharing stories of childhood and dreams for the future. For the first time, Clara felt she belonged, not just in Alexander's home, but in his life. And yet the outside world remained relentless. Gossip did not fade easily. Their return to Boston's glittering society meant facing sharp eyes and cruel whispers at every turn. To some, Clara would always be the secretary who married a billionaire. To others, she was a gold digger hiding behind a polished smile. One night, at a charity dinner, the whispers struck again. Clara caught fragments of venomous words from women who thrived on cruelty. "She's just playing the perfect wife. He'll grow tired of her soon enough." Clara's heart stung, but before doubt could consume her, Alexander silenced it all. Standing tall, his voice deep and commanding, he declared before the crowd, "My wife is the bravest woman I know. Her strength, her compassion, her belief in me, they are worth more than every fortune in this room. She has given me more than I could ever repay. And she is mine, as I am hers." The room quieted. The cruel whispers dissolved, leaving only stunned silence. Clara's eyes filled with tears, and in that moment she knew he was not just defending her. He was honoring her, lifting her above the very judgment meant to shame her. But shadows still lingered. The ghosts of Isabella's betrayal had not vanished, and Clarissa's poisonous words echoed in Clara's mind late at night. Could Alexander truly let go of the past? Could love built on such fragile ground survive the weight of doubt? One evening, as the wind whipped across the cliffs of Cape Cod, Alexander stood with Clara on the veranda. His arm wrapped firmly around her as if he feared the world itself might tear her away. His voice, low and steady, carried a weight she had not heard before. "I don't care what they say. I don't care about the whispers or the stares. You are the woman who gave me back my life, and I will never let you go." Clara pressed closer to him, her eyes glistening as the truth settled deep in her heart. For the first time she believed it. This love was not fragile. It was strong, strong enough to face storms, strong enough to outlast the shadows, strong enough to rewrite both their lives. But fate had not finished testing them. For even as love took root, the echoes of the past were gathering, ready to strike again. Love had taken root between Clara and Alexander, but the world beyond their sanctuary refused to let it grow unchallenged. Shadows from the past lingered like storm clouds waiting for the right moment to strike. It began with a phone call. Clara answered, expecting her mother, but the voice that slipped through the line was sharp and honeyed. "Clara," the woman heard. "How charming to finally speak with you. I'm Clarissa. I was a dear friend of Isabella's." The name chilled her. Isabella. The ghost that haunted Alexander's every guarded look. The betrayal that had carved scars so deep he had nearly forgotten how to feel. Clarissa's words dripped with poison. "I heard about your arrangement. How convenient, really." After all Alexander endured with Isabella, he goes and marries another opportunist. Don't think for a moment you'll last, dear. You're nothing more than a lovely distraction, a prop to parade for his investors. When the time comes, he'll cast you aside like he did her. The line went dead, but the venom remained. Clara stood frozen, the phone heavy in her hand, Clarissa's cruel words echoing in her mind like thunder. That night, as Alexander returned from his office, Clara confronted him. Her voice trembled though her eyes held steady. "Is it true? Did you pay Isabella to keep quiet? Am I just another investment to you?" The question cut him to the core. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, Alexander Morgan looked not like a magnate, but like a man, stripped bare. He turned toward the window, the city lights reflecting in his storm-gray eyes. "Yes," he said finally, his voice low and raw. "I paid her." Clara's heart cracked, but before the doubt could shatter her completely, his words poured out in a rush. "I didn't pay her to silence secrets. I paid her to stay away, to never show her face again, to never poison my life or my business again. It was the last, most humiliating transaction of a marriage that had already been nothing but a lie. I buried it out of shame. I didn't tell you because I didn't want that darkness to stain what we were building." He turned then, and his eyes, haunted but honest, met hers. "I was a fool once, Clara. I let Isabella break me in ways I still carry. But you are not her. You are the only reason I can breathe again, and I cannot lose you." Tears welled in Clara's eyes as she stepped forward, cupping his face in her hands. Her thumbs brushed away the lines of exhaustion etched deep into his skin. "You're not a fool, Alexander. You were a man who trusted the wrong person. But you are not broken. You're a man who has learned to trust again with me, and I will never betray you." His arms wrapped around her then, pulling her so tightly it felt as though he feared she might vanish. His voice cracked against her ear. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. You've shown me that love isn't weakness. It's strength. The only strength that truly matters." Clara clung to him, her tears falling freely, not from fear but from certainty. For the first time there was no wall between them, no fortress left to hide behind. The ghosts of Isabella and Clarissa still circled like predators, but in that embrace, Clara knew something they could never touch. Their love had been tested, and instead of breaking, it had become unbreakable. But outside their walls, the world still whispered, and fate had one final test waiting for them. The storms of the past had raged, but Alexander and Clara emerged stronger, bound by trust and love that no whisper could destroy. What had begun as a contract had transformed into a bond neither of them could have imagined. Years passed, carrying with them seasons of change. The Cape Cod mansion, once a cold fortress of silence, became a home filled with laughter, warmth, and light. Clara found her place not only as Alexander's wife but as his partner, her sketches and ideas shaping the very heart of his projects. Hotels and resorts that bore his name now carried her influence too, blending elegance with humanity, luxury with soul. Together, they built more than a business. They built a life. 5 years later, the gardens echoed with the bright laughter of a child. Their son, Gabriel, 4 years old with storm-gray eyes like his father's and Clara's radiant smile, ran across the grass with boundless energy. Alexander, once the untouchable magnate, chased him with playful determination. His dark hair, now touched with silver, glistened in the sunlight as Gabriel squealed, "Daddy, you can't catch me." "Oh, I think I can." Alexander laughed, scooping the boy into his arms. His face, once carved by caution and scars, was now alive with joy and love. Clara watched from the terrace, her hand resting on her gently rounded stomach. She was expecting, again, another life growing inside her, a testament to the love that had blossomed where despair once lived. She joined them, slipping into Alexander's side, and whispered, "Remember when you thought you didn't know how to be a father?" "I remember being terrified," Alexander admitted, his voice rich with warmth. "I thought I'd ruin everything. I thought I'd only ever be a broken man." Clara touched his cheek, her eyes shining. "And look at you now. You're the father every child dreams of, and the man I always knew you could be." Gabriel squirmed in his father's arms, giggling. "Will you and Mommy love each other forever? Like in the fairy tales?" Alexander looked at Clara, his storm gray, eyes now soft with a devotion that held the weight of every vow he had never spoken. "Fairy tales don't even come close to what I feel for your mother. Love like ours isn't just forever. It's for every life we could ever live." Clara's heart swelled. She leaned against him, the man who had once been locked behind walls now fully hers, body and soul. She had chosen sacrifice. He had chosen caution. But together they had chosen love. As the sun dipped into the horizon and the garden filled with the sound of their son's laughter, Clara knew the truth. Some stories begin with storms and scars, but the bravest ones end with light. And theirs was not just a marriage born of necessity. It was a love that had turned pain into strength, shadows into hope, and two lonely hearts into a forever family.